Hi, everyone. I believe that I should be live. I am definitely going to wait a second before I start to get really active into talking about everything. If you can hear me, please make sure that you say hello, because there's always the possibility that something about my audio has messed up. So, in order to make sure that that doesn't happen, I am always checking my end, but I do not know what is visible or audible on other people's ends. I am so excited to be back talking about Golarion. In case people can't tell, it is absolutely my favorite topic to go live and talk about. And I'm also excited to be here to be chatting with all of you beautiful people. I just really enjoy being live and being in front of an audience, which is funny because every single time I go live, I always get these knots in my stomach and this sort of fun but impossible to adjust to anxiety. That said, I'm so glad that the audio does seem to be working. I appreciate you, Adam, and that we are all here able to chat and learn about Pathfinder's flagship central world setting. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff today. I am planning to stream for more or less a full hour. I did a lot more advertising of this than I initially planned to, but I am trying to work on mastering the art of self promotion. It is extremely difficult for me to do because I find it unnatural as hell, but it is an important part of growing your audience. The reality with this particular stream is that I'm testing how I can refine something of this format to make it work for Twitch. I have a couple of different ideas in mind. I would absolutely love to do this on Twitch because on Twitch I am kind of close to becoming to becoming the first level of Twitch person. Once I actually start live streaming again, I'll only need something like 20 something followers before I can actually get started on that. But until then, let's go ahead and let's start to talk about Golarion, or rather, we're going to talk about what's around Golarion before we start to talk about Golarion itself. If you are one of those people who stresses out about pronunciation, so am I. It is a fantasy game, and these are not real names, with a handful of exceptions, none of which I will be talking about in this particular video. So it's okay if I mispronounce stuff. I'm just here trying to have a fun time, and so should you. Let's all come together and let's learn from each other. So before we get started, I wanted to talk about the central purpose of this particular live stream. Hey, Tria, I'm glad that you were able to stop by. I wanted to talk about the central purpose of this live stream. I have a notes document, which is multiple pages long. So if you occasionally see this little machine in my hands, it's me glancing at my notes. The central purpose of this particular live stream is for me to talk about Golarion and the solar system Golarion is in. And the way that I will think that it is a success or not is if you leave this live stream feeling a little bit more informed, feeling a little bit more knowledgeable, and feeling more excited to learn about Golarion's history as devised by the good people over at Paizo. I am extremely excited to be talking about this topic. I have put notes over in the description. Um, yes, elves actually are aliens, kind of, in Golarion. I'm going to talk about that when we get to the appropriate section because there's lots of really weird stuff about biology in Golarion and in Pathfinder in the Great Beyond, which is the name of the multiverse that Golarion is situated in. But the central purpose is just for you all to get a little bit more excited about Paizo's history, about Golarion's history, and also for me to get more used to live streaming. So if you leave this and you're excited and energized to learn about the history that Paizo created when they were creating Golarion, I'd be happy. Some really cool tidbits to just sort of whet your minds a little about the history of the Great Beyond is that it is actually not the first multiverse in the history of the grand setting of Pathfinder. It is at least the second and very possibly the third or even fourth, there is a cyclical nature to history in the great beyond, wherein there will be a multiversal apocalypse that will happen. And at the end of that apocalypse, one survivor will find some sort of great relic, and they will use that relic to sort of remake the multiverse. One of the central historical documents for the Pathfinder multiverse is called the Windsong Testaments. It's something to that effect, and it chronicles a vast history wherein Pharasma, the goddess of death and fate, was originally a person who inhabited the past multiverse, and she witnessed the end of the multiverse. She survived it, and along with great old ones and other sorts of eldritch gods and monsters that were holdovers from past multiverses and that existed outside of the multiverse and just sort of watched and crept, they all started to create existence together. I'm not going to talk about history in that sort of grand sense. I've actually talked about that in another live stream. I probably will do it again at some point in the future, but you actually can find that live stream where I talked about Pharasma and multiversal history at some length from a couple of years ago. That was actually the beginning of my particular interest in talking about Pathfinder's history as this sort of grand thing that is worth live streams, even though there's certain flaws inherent in live streams, such as the fact that I sometimes get nervous, the fact that I can't talk for long periods of time without at least needing a second to catch my breath. But I find the topic so much fun and my mind is so unorganized that live streams are a particularly fun method for me to explore this history and for me to talk about it in a lively and engaging way with friends and hopefully teach y'all something. So, what and where is Golarion? Well, Golarion is a small, seemingly ordinary world, although it's not actually that small in the like planetary scale of things. There's worlds that are smaller and bigger than Golarion throughout the multiverse and also throughout the material plane, which is the name for the corporeal bodily universe that all mortal beings sort of start life on. Technically, all mortal beings start life off in the positive plane as souls and as positive energy before becoming material mortal beings and then dying and going to the boneyard and then to whatever other destination they are meant to be, assuming they don't get hijacked by various extraplanar baddies, of course. But that is something that we should talk about when we talk about death, which is also a thing that I've talked about in the past in the context of Pathfinder. It's very fun to actually be able to talk about something that I know an extensive number of details about in a live stream because I actually don't really need my notes all that much. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was the solar system that Golarion was located in, because Golarion is one planet in a universe of planets. There are, just like in our version of the material plane, the real world, there are presumably billions of galaxies and trillions, if not quintillions, of solar systems. In fact, there are at least a handful of other planets that people can visit at various points during adventures in Golarion, including Earth, a world that was influential for Golarion's history in another sense that we'll talk about at least vaguely a little bit later, Andor Fafa, which is not in the solar system, and I believe not even in the same galaxy as Golarion. And also worlds like Eox, which is a dead planet that is located in the same solar system as Golarion. Golarion orbits a star. It is the third star in orbit, just like Earth is, from our star. And the other planets that we are going to talk about, we will mention in just a second. But before that, we should talk about the fact that Golarion has a title. It actually has two titles, which makes it a little bit bizarre. It has two titles that are commonly known to the people of Golarion, specifically the Child and also the Cage. The reason it's called the Child is because throughout its history, various gods have been born there, and also it is an unusually lush and verdant planet that is home to a truly ridiculous number of different species and civilizations. And it's actually very fun that it's known as The Child. I really like its title of The Child. There is also a second title known as The Cage, due to the fact that Rovagug, the rough beast and a primordial god of destruction, was sealed on Golarion a long time ago during the so-called Age of Creation, which was the first age and was a primordial age of uncounted years. If you are assuming that Earth is an old planet, then you can presume that Golarion is probably billions of years old, although I don't know if there's actually any evidence to suggest that it is genuinely billions of years old. We're going to be talking about the different ages in a little bit, but I did want to talk about the different planets first because they're actually very fascinating. You can visit a handful of them pretty easily, and actually, not all of the planets in Golarion solar system are planets. There's two, the two that are located the furthest away, the generation ship known as Aposte, and also the nascent great old one known as Octurne, that are celestial bodies that are in the orbit of the same sun as Golarion, but are not actually planets. We will talk about them very briefly. I had multiple notes that talked about the different planets, and I did want to mention them because they're so fun. If you want to know more specific details about them and actually go in depth, there is a campaign setting source book named Distant Worlds, which was published in 2012 and written by James L. Stutter, and that talks about the other planets in great detail. So if you want to find that, you could definitely find it online, whether in the form of a PDF or you go and buy it. I've purchased the PDF. I purchased it a long time ago, but I've never actually found, ignore the product placement to my side, by the way. I've never actually found the physical book, although I know that you can find it in certain places if you're willing to look. But the different planets, in terms of their distance from the actual sun, are Abalon, which is known as the horse. It is a mysterious mechanical apocalypse world. It's inhabited by Abalonians, a race of intelligent, kind of constructs that were created by eldritch, not quite eldritch, but mysterious beings known as the First Ones. The First Ones came from a very distant star, and they were looking for metals and also the land that was owned. Um, I agree, Tria. If someone at KFC wants to sponsor me to talk about honestly anything, I can talk about a lot of different stuff. I would definitely benefit from that money. Abalon is just a mysterious mechanical world. A long time ago, it was settled by the First Ones. They abandoned it long before any of the adventure paths would take place in the current age, which is the Age of Lost Omens. Traveling there is certainly possible, but it is such a hot and overwhelming world that it is difficult and dangerous for mundane mortal beings to actually come to the planet unless they have some sort of fire equipment. The next planet is Castrovel, which is titled The Green. Castrovel is a warm green world covered in lush environments, and it's the closest planet to Golarion. It's covered in forests, swamps, and vast patches of colored gas. It's inhabited by a number of different species, just like most of the more distant planets tend to be. Most specifically and most notably, it's inhabited by the Lushtuna, which are a race of matriarchal humanoid and human looking women primarily, who are also commonly psychic. Men are sort of second class citizens. It's probably not quite as rough as it sounds. I do plan to do a live stream where we'll be talking about the planets in depth, but I didn't want to talk about too much in this specific video. Golarion, it's the subject of this video, so I'm going to glance over that in my notes. Akaton, which is the next planet, is titled The Red. It's covered in deserts, vast mountain ranges, and towering glaciers. It's inhabited by a fair number of species, although it is also a pretty difficult world to live in. The most prominent race are the humanoids known as the Shababs, which are very large four-armed humanoids. They have very cool cultures, and they actually do feature in a handful of adventure paths. So it's possible, if you are sticking with the Paizo source material, for you to come across them if you do the right sort of adventure paths. Verces is the next planet. It is a tidally locked world, so at any one point in time, one side will be stuck in eternal darkness, and one side will be stuck in eternal day. It is inhabited by a highly regimented humanoid race known as the Versites. They have a number of different castes, and they definitely merit their own full explanation, so I'm not going to talk too much about them. I mentioned Epochs, which is the very next planet. It's titled The Dead. It is a prominent player in Starfinder, which is the sci-fi slash kind of sequel to Pathfinder that lots of people are starting to get really into fairly recently, which is really exciting. I will be talking a little bit about Starfinder at the end of this video, but basically there was a magical nuclear holocaust in Eox millennia ago that annihilated the planet's life and transformed them into magical undead. The prominent race of undead beings are kind of lich-like creatures known as the Bone Sages. After that, we start to get into the funkier planets. Triaxis is known as the Wanderer. It's a world of extremes. It is half ice and half summer, although it's actual full ice and full summer. It just depends on where it is in its orbit when you locate it, because it has a wandering orbit, and at times it will be extraordinarily close to the sun, and at times it will be extraordinarily far away. You actually get to visit Triaxis if you do the adventure path Reign of Winter. It is the central setting for the fourth adventure, and you get to meet Triaxians, which are furry, almost elf-like humanoids, although what they appear like actually depends on when they were born and where the planet was located when they were born. At least if I remember correctly. I might be a little wrong on that one. Lilivara is the first gas giant planet. It is the gas giant closest to the sun, and it's the planet inhabited by birds and flying beings. The rings also house life, although that life is mostly spirits and spirit-like creatures like elementals and mephits. After this, we start to get into the funkier settings for adventures if someone wants to keep it in the solar system. We're beginning with Bradaria, a gas giant inhabited by floating jellyfish creatures named Breatharians. Breatharians have sent colonizers to other planets in the solar system, most notably Lilivara, although on Lilivara, which is covered in ley lines, the Breatharians went to sleep and they became known as Breatharian dreamers. And if you try to wake them up, it goes very badly. Anyone who wakes them up suffers their wrath forever, basically, or at least until they die. And they actually never made contact with Brethara, with their homeworld and their people. So it's kind of a mystery what happens to them. Although I'm pretty sure by now the Breatharians back on their homeworld actually know to just not go there. Lilivara is just a dangerous place to stay. There's also the Han, which are spider creatures that explore the planet using balloons made of spider silk. I personally think that that's extremely rad, although I'm also deeply arachnophobic. So, oh, I agree, Adam. These orbits are fucking nightmarish. After this, it's before we move on to Aposte, which was the generation ship that I mentioned earlier. It's worth noting that Brethara is the largest planet in the solar system, and it is the last actual planet, although there's probably planetoids and shit elsewhere in the solar system, but it's the last actual planet that we will be talking about. Aposte is a generation ship that sent voyagers an incredible distance before the generation ship started malfunctioning and got sucked into the orbit of the star that Golarion orbits. Got sucked into its sort of gravitational well. I think I'm using that correctly. If not, I'll definitely be corrected, and that's fine. I'm doing my best. This is inhabited by a collective of creatures known as the Lee. The thing that unifies the Lee is that they're capable of interbreeding, and they are all moderately intelligent. They're at least sapiens. The problem is that they don't actually share anything in common other than that. As a little bit of the history there, there is a special inhabitant of Aposte named Grandfather Stone, who is an unbelievably ancient construct that's capable of speech, who understands the planet's true purpose. He knows, or they know, that it is a generation ship and that they have some idea of what that means, but their memory has started to glitch out a little bit and they're incapable of remembering whether the Lee. I'll actually put that in the comment section so that way people can know how to spell it. I just posted it in the comments. The thing that it is unsure about is whether or not those were the original inhabitants, the original creators of the ship, or that is their sort of devolved descendants. It's probable that those are the descendants of the original inhabitants, but no one's sure. Octurne, which is a place that people should absolutely not visit, is known as the Stranger. And it is not actually a planet. It is a baby great old one. It is a baby great old one that is so vast that it has its own gravitational pull and its own atmosphere, but it is very decidedly a fully living creature. It is not something that is just a planet like Golarion is. I think that this is an especially interesting thing, especially because Octurne is also a fairly prominent setting in Starfinder, wherein lots of stuff is different, but some of the basic stuff that remains the same is that it is a great old one. It is technically twice the size of Golarion, and it is inhabited by incredibly dangerous, incredibly aggressive eldritch creatures, eldritch cultists, and also the rare handful of creatures that are opposed to eldritch beings that have come to Octurne to hunt them down or to find some way to stop either the nascent apotheosis of Octurne or at least to keep it dormant instead of it being a just fully living, fully aggressive, planet-sized creature. Now that we have spent a while talking about the solar system of Golarion, I want to start to talk about the calendars. I have a very nice notes section. I actually might make this document public so that way people can come and glance at it. But it is very brief and it's very much my style of notes. So I don't think it would be useful for anyone else who wants to read it other than to get like the barest bones ideas. But there are two calendars that are commonly used in Golarion. Specifically, there's the Absalom Reckoning calendar, which is the system that is the most formalized by the masterminds over at Paizo with dates and things that actually make sense and can be charted. And there's also the Imperial calendar. These two systems of calendars are used on different continents. Specifically, the Absalom Reckoning is used on Garmund and also the continent of Avestan, which are the two central-most continents, not in the world, but those are the two that most players of Pathfinder would be familiar with. And then there's the Imperial calendar, which is used by the inhabitants of the mountainous and mysterious continent of Tian Sha, which is a vastly different sort of imperialistic China-like ish continent. It's actually fairly well documented. There's enough history there that anyone who wants to learn a whole lot about it definitely can. But these two different calendars use things very, very differently. I think that they both use the same basic things. Like they both probably have 12 months. And also, let me see how many days of the week there are. I think that there's 7. I have both of these things, and I'm going to use some time to talk about all of these names, which is going to be just me pronouncing a lot of different stuff for a second, which for anyone who knows me and fantasy names, we're going to have a good time as long as you can like laugh at silly pronunciations of things. But the way that the two calendars work is that they're both divvied up into ages. The Absalom Reckoning calendar has 10 ages. There's actually only 8 ages in the Absalom Reckoning calendar, but there's 2 ages that are included in that have their own special designations that I will be talking about during this video. It has a number of months named after the gods, and then it has days that are not named after the gods, but that are just designated into work days and whether or not those days are likely to have like religious festivals. So the months of the year, begin with Abydos, which is 31 days. It's the first month of the year named in honor of Abadar. Then there is Calistril, which is 28 days. It is a late winter month named for Calistra, the goddess of revenge, seduction, and deeply associated with elves. And then after that, there's Farast, which is named after Phrasma. It's an early spring month that has 31 days, the goddess of birth and death and fate. Gozarin, which is 30 days, named after the god of the wind and also weather generally, Gozareth. There's Desnus, which has 31 days, and it is a mild month named for the goddess of dreams, Desna, who's also the goddess of travelers and like a couple of other things. After this, there's Sarenrath, which is 31 days. It's the sun goddess Sarenrae's month, and just a very cool month. Lots of people are familiar with Sarenrae. She is probably the goddess from Pathfinder that the most people are familiar with. She was the goddess of the character Pike in Critical Role, if I remember correctly, back when Critical Role was a Pathfinder session. And it's just super cool goddess. We're going to talk about her more extensively than we will most deities in this video because her history is one of the most intimately involved with the world. After Sarenrath, there's Estrus, which is 31 days. It's named in honor of the god Aristil. That is the god of community and farming and a bunch of other really cool stuff. He's personally my favorite deity in the Central Pathfinder contingency. Toll is correct. She did accidentally the planet once. The accidentally is really conditional. We're going to talk about the pit that she created because it is a pretty pivotal location to world history in Golarion. Then there's Aridus, named after the maybe dead god Aradin. It lasts 31 days. There is Rova, which lasts 30 days. It's the beginning of autumn, and it's named after Rovagug. Although dwarves do not like this name, they prefer to name this month Torawash after their creator god, Torug, who was one of the central people in the alliance that defeated Rovagug, which we will talk about. There's Lamashan, which is 31 days. It's named for Lamashtu, the goddess of monsters, birth, and motherhood. Really, really weird fusion there, but she's basically a fertility goddess, but also for monsters and demons. She is the closest thing Pathfinder has to Loth. I will talk about that at a later date, but she is a central goddess who was also a demon lord. She devoured a god, and in doing so, pissed off one of the god's followers, but also became a goddess. Very cool history. Very weird that she is worshipped. She is very widely worshipped, and she's also like assuaged by mothers who don't want to get fucked by her in like a not fun way. There's Neth, which is 30 days, not 31 days. It's named for Nethys, the two-faced god of magic, and also the sort of god king of ancient Osiren, which is it's just Egypt, but make it Pathfinder. There's Chthoniya, which is 31 days long, and it is the last month of the year. It's named after the primordial deity of darkness, Zon-Kuthon, who is also a character that, assuming I get to live out my like ideal fantasy for this video and live stream, we will be talking about in pretty significant detail, because Zon-Kuthon's history was really extensive and is very interesting. But yeah, we're going to talk about that. For the second chart that I mentioned, I have a chart of the days of the week according to the Absalon Reckoning. There's Moon Day, which is a work day with some religions that hold their ceremonies at night. There's Tola Day, a work day. Wheel Day, a work day. Oath Day, a work day, which is associated with Abadar, who's the god of business and civilization, and was one of the central human deities. Very cool dude. It is a work day, but it's also considered advantageous to sign contracts and oaths on this day. There's Fire Day, a work day that is most often the market day. Star Day, a work day, and Sunday. Very funny that it's just Sunday. There's nothing special about that. It's generally a day of rest and one devoted to religious observations. So it actually kind of sucks that if you live in Pathfinder, if you live in Golarion, you have a 6-day work week. That sucks. Just one of the little things I noticed when I was making these notes. I actually don't have that sort of color commentary on the notes, but I do have color commentary that I will read verbatim when we get to the parts where it is significant. Um, so we are now going to talk about the ages according to the Absalom Reckoning calendar. I'm talking specifically about the Absalom Reckoning calendar because there are 8 ages that have like chronicled notes and that people can really fully delve into in the Absalom Reckoning calendar. The Imperial calendar has 4 ages, and the ages. Damn, did I really not take notes on them? I could have sworn that I took notes on them in this, but as I'm looking through, I do not appear to have. So we are going to focus on the Absalom Reckoning calendar for the rest of this video. Oh, I do have the notes. Okay. The Imperial calendar talks about the Age of Dragons, the Age of Ashes, the Age of Ascendancy, and the Age of Succession. I probably will talk about the Imperial Reckoning calendar just in a full video. If I ever do start to make videos again, I plan to do a video specifically on the Imperial calendar because it's very fascinating. It's just that it was easier for me to write concrete notes. Hey, Randy, I'm so excited that so many people from different parts of my life could come on and join the chat. We're talking about Pathfinder. This is a big old history video. So if you like history, even in fictional settings, this is something you'll be into. You probably would like that if you've never played Pathfinder. I really hope you do. I think you would enjoy Pathfinder. I know that I really love Pathfinder. It is my favorite tabletop RPG. It is also far more complex than D&D. At least 5th edition D&D and Pathfinder 1E are more complex. Pathfinder 2E is noticeably simpler, which is very good. It helps people get more into it. But we are focusing on 1st edition stuff in this specific video. So now that we're talking about the ages, we are going to move on over to the central area of this video. It is funny that it took half an hour to hit that point, but I was mentally prepared for it to take this long. So the first age, according to the ages as used by the Absalom Reckoning calendar, is the age before ages. This is kind of a misnomer. It is not a proper age in and of itself, but it is a term used to collectively group the ages of prehistory. The ages of prehistory are the age of creation, the age of serpents, and the age of legend. The first real documented history in Pathfinder generally begins with the Age of Darkness / the very end of the Age of Legends. And now that we have mentioned that, we'll go ahead and start talking about the different ages. The Age of Creation is it's, in my opinion, true prehistory. What I mean by true prehistory is that it is basically unknowable. It is effectively impossible to keep track of all of the sort of stuff that was happening during the Age of Creation. This was the age following Golarian's very earliest moments up until roughly the defeat of Rovagug and his capture. There's a number of very important events that happened during this era. One of the big ones was that the Algothuls, which are aboleths but make them Pathfinder, um, came from a distant world, which was the world that they were first born in, to Golarion, and they seeded multiple other worlds during this era, which was the high point of their empire, and they took over the oceans of Golarion. Golarion has multiple oceans and multiple continents. We are not going to talk about the different continents in this specific video because I feel like talking about the geography of Pathfinder would take too long before we really wanted to get into the meat and potatoes. But during the Age of Creation, the areas that were not directly overseen and governed by the gods were ruled by, for the most part, 2 different factions. The oceans were ruled by the Agothuls, which are just Pathfinder aboleths, and the surface was ruled by the Xiorns, which are known as the Vault Builders. They were not extraordinarily active on the surface of the world, but deep underground they built tremendous vaults, and some of these vaults become central campaign settings and central locations for different adventure paths. But the Ixiorns were a race of creators who basically molded the earth and they manipulated it, and they went to war with the Agathuls, who wanted complete dominance over the planet. During this time, the Agathuls won because the Agathuls were incredible users of magic, and they also took advantage of and manipulated some of the earliest ancestors of the different races that would eventually populate Golarion. Most notably, they were very strong manipulators and overseers of humans on the continent of Aztlan, which is a continent that has since sunk beneath the waves over the course of the events in different ages. And they also used very powerful magics in order to defeat the Ixiorns and sent them packing to the Earth plane, which is one of the four classical element dimensions that inhabits the cosmology of Pathfinder, along with the plane of fire, the plane of air, and the plane of water. All of those topics deserve their own videos. The Age of Creation definitely deserves a full video where we talk about it in great detail. But this age culminates with Rovagug, who was previously a creature that was tasked with digging out the abyss, one of the universal size dimensions that inhabits the cosmology of the Pathfinder multiverse known as the Great Beyond, and was an omnicidal monster that just wanted to eat and devour everything. And sometimes this creature would escape from the abyss and would wreak havoc on the mortal plane. When it wreaked havoc on the mortal plane, one of the big things it would do was it would find worlds and it would devour them. It would eat them entirely before going on to the next world. And it did this to 7 possibly uninhabited worlds in the primordial past, but those worlds were, at the very least, if they had life, the life was very simple, and I didn't really like it all that much. So when a coalition of gods banded together and defeated it, it was sent packing comparatively peacefully compared to what would happen later on. But an event would happen on a world wherein the primordial god Ithis was slain by his brother Asmodeus, at least if you believe the Windsong Testaments. If that's the creation cosmology document that you use, then in the wake of this specific murder, the world was changed forever. And something about that world, this is very possibly the beginning of something approaching sapience and sentient life, even though the first world was not where Ithis was murdered, because Rovagug would escape from the abyss, would devour this world, and would find it much more to his liking. Rovagug would then devour multiple other worlds across the universe, and when it started to turn its attention to the human inhabited worlds of Andorfafa, Golarian, and Earth, the other gods would decide that it would be too dangerous to let it continue to just do whatever it wanted and to not try and confront it. And they came up with a plan. There were multiple different stages to this plan. This was absolutely a plane shaking, formative event wherein deities like Asmodeus would work with deities like Dual Brawl, which was the original name of Zon-Kuthon, and also Torug. It would be far from the only time Asmodeus, the god of tyrants and lawful evil, would work with good deities, but it was certainly one of the most plane shaping. They decided to come together and they created a plan whereby they would create a vault in one of the worlds that Rovagug had his eyes on, Golarion, obviously. And they would trap him there, and if they couldn't kill him, they would at least seal him away. Shai is correct that Dual Brawl is just Zon-Kuthon's nobody. We're going to talk about Zon-Kuthon as soon as I'm done with the story of Rovagug. I had it later on in my notes, but it's such an important story that it is actually worth sitting down and talking about, especially because we've already been live streaming 38 minutes. But multiple deities would come together, including Kalistra, Torug, Asmodeus, Dol Brawl, Saren Ray, Shaylin, basically most of the central deities of the inner sea region that did not become deities because of the Starstone test would band together and would seal away Rovagug. It was not easy. Multiple deities died, sacrificing their lives. And apparently, there were also deities that fought on Rovagug's side, which is very amusing to me. It is not super clear in the text of the different documents that have contributed to the story if there were actually deities that fought alongside Rovagug, because some of the text says if they were, they're certainly forgotten now. I personally think it would have been stupid for a deity to fight alongside Rovagug, but deities do not always do smart things, so it's entirely possible that one of them was just dumb for a second. Fought alongside Rovagug, got his ass extraordinarily murdered, and then Rovagug was defeated. Sarenrae cast away Rovagug, and Rovagug was too powerful to actually kill. So instead of killing Rovagug, they effectively put him to sleep in the essentially heart of Golarion, a region that they named the Deadbolts, and they locked his ass away. He is extraordinarily unactive, but because he's a god, killing him is an act that is extraordinarily difficult, especially a deity that is as primordial as Rovagug. And even as inactive as he is able to do things like dream and corrupt people. It is actually his dreams that were responsible for corrupting the elves that became the dark elves in the cosmology of Golarion. And Dolbrawl, back when he was still Dolbrawl, actually created Starstone, not Starstone, he created Star Spell Towers that he used to lock away Rovagug's ability to hear prayers. But this doesn't stop people from getting spells from Rovagug if they worship him. And Shai is talking about this right now. There's lots of interesting history there that is absolutely worth talking about. But now we are going to talk about Zon Kuthan, the god for edgelords, everyone's favorite edgy boy. So Dolbrawl was the name of Shaylin's half brother and was the son of an ancient spirit wolf. He is Shaylin's half brother, and at some points they shared their domains of beauty, art, music, and love. And they were a happy family for untold eras of time, for thousands, maybe even millions or billions of years, depending on how old you think the universe of Pathfinder is in your particular version. But as they got older, Dolbrawl started to get a little bit darker and started to get a little bit more jealous of Shaylin. I guess for reasons that you can headcanon because there's no actual explanation for all of this stuff. But Dolbrawl got jealous and had a big fight with Shaylin. Shaylin won the fight, or at least didn't lose the fight, and Dolbrawl decided to flee to the space between stars. If you are familiar with Lovecraft, you can probably get where this is going. Dolbrawl was tormented by one of the great old ones or some other being of primordial and undefeatable power. And let's see. Shy is correct that it's probably because Shaylin was so beloved by all the gods. But what's weird is lots of people liked Dolbrawl too. There's actually different documents that talk about this history in pretty significant detail. And Zon Kuthan was the end result of some alien entity tormenting and effectively possessing Dolbrawl. Dolbrawl / Zon Kuthan would return during some primordial age. It is not very explicitly stated, but they would have a conflict with Shaylin. Shaylin would also come out on top and would get the Glaive of Souls, which is one of the ancient artifacts that they shared originally. And now that it was fully Shaylin's, some believe that it is the key to redeeming Zon Kuthan, if it is entirely possible. Shaylin personally believes that Dolbrawl still exists within Zon Kuthan, and that it is possible to find some way to purify Dolbrawl and give him the strength needed to reject the part of him that has become fully Zon Kuthan. And if so, that would be a truly tremendous universe-shaking event that would result in the downfall of one of the most evil entities that has like a name and that has shaped the history of Golarian and countless other worlds. Right now, at this point in history, there is not much that is going on with Dol Brawl, although it is likely that it was during the Age of Creation where he fled and then came back. And it was during this time that he had a conflict with Abadar, the god that I previously mentioned of civilization and banking and lots of other cool stuff that helped humans become the best humans they could be. And Abadar was able to presumably defeat or at least weaken Zon-Kuthon to the point where Zon-Kuthon feigned listening to reason, and the two of them had a conversation and came up with a pact. Zon-Kuthon would flee to the plane of shadows for an indeterminate period of time for in exchange for an item from the first vault, which is a primordial collection of items that Abadar has, which is in Abadar's divine plane, divine realm area. And Zon-Kuthon could pick any one item, and then he would flee, and he would never return to Golarion, and presumably, although probably not explicitly, the material universe, wherein wherein he would only return when the sun stops shining on Golarion. This gets weird, but we're going to come back to this. So, and now that we've talked about the Age of Creation and we've talked about its beginning and ending, we're going to go to the next age, which is the Age of Serpents. This is the age wherein mortal races begin to come to power. And during this era, the serpent folk become one of the predominant powers in the world. The serpent folk were the leaders of an unbelievably ancient empire that has long since been completely decimated. But at the very height of its power, it was so powerful that there were serpent folk scouts that went to other worlds, although they were unable to take significant amounts of power or influence. And during this time, other nations began to rise, such as the original Cyclops nation of Golgan, some of whom warred with the serpent folk and would eventually, due in part to the residual influence the serpent folk, descend into evil acts, even though originally they were a deeply civilized nation of warriors and sages that were led by powerful oracles who used the Pathfinder Cyclops ability to see into the future to guide their actions. During this era, we also start to see the rise of humans in Aztlan, which I am absolutely not pronouncing correctly. Elves are believed to have either come over from Castrovel or have been somehow birthed on Golarion, but it's worth noting that in Pathfinder, species do not actually typically have one canonical homeworld. Humans are known to have arisen independently on Underfall, on Earth, and on Golarion. So it's entirely possible that we will just never hear a canon explanation, although I personally think that elves are from Castroval and that they just came over and stayed over because they liked it so much. And also because a good number of them got trapped underground during the Age of Darkness. There were a number of other things that happened that kept elves on Golarion. Um, yeah, basically, when gods want a planet to have people, they just put humans on it. Although it's actually worth noting that, weirdly enough, Anderfafa, which is a name I am absolutely butchering, sorry, was a technologically advanced world that was believed to be devoid of magic and gods. Although how true and how canonical that is should probably not be taken seriously. We do not have that much information on Anderfafa. It's just primarily known as the place where the Starship Divinity came from. The Starship Divinity is the central location for the baddie from the adventure path, the Iron Gods, which is a god that is all about, which is an AI machine god. Very cool baddie. Absolutely, absolutely underused. I would love to see more Ender Fafa shit and more sci-fi stuff in Pathfinder as opposed to Starfighter. Some of the other really, really cool stuff from the Age of Serpents is the fact that the Archmage Sin was one of the central Atziltani humans who was a magic user. He was one of the first humans to discover the true secrets of glyph magic, which was the same magic that was used by the Al Ghul. And because of this, the human archmages of Atzeltan were like, hey, you either need to die or you need to leave. And he decided very smartly to just sort of peace out and go find his own empire. He really said, screw you guys, I'm going home, and made his own home far away. A home which would be destroyed and then would sort of come back over the course of the first adventure path and multiple other adventure paths with a very long and ridiculous history. We'll talk about Thessalonia in its own video at some point. During this period in time, the Algothul were starting to get suspicious of humans, and some of the first humans that would revolt were going to begin to revolt, and were starting to realize that maybe the Veiled Masters, which was the subcategory slash caste of Algothul that were magic people and would use illusions to disguise themselves as humans, were really bad. So the Algothul decided that things were not going great for them, and they should call on the Grand Congress of Algothuls, which decided that the Algothuls in charge of Golarion had done a really bad fucking job, and they would unleash the events known as Earthfall. But that is part of the Age of Legend. So the Age of Legend is the next age. This is also one of the ages that doesn't have concrete dates, but this is actually the very last age that doesn't have a concrete age. This is the last full age that is... This video is definitely going to go over an hour. I'm saying it right now. I originally wasn't sure if we were going to go for an hour. We'll go for like an hour and 15 minutes or something. And I will do another live stream at some point in the future where I talk about anything that I couldn't talk about here. But the Age of Legend ends with humans starting to plan more concrete revolts against the Algothuls, and the oh wait, no, fuck, that was the end of the Age of Serpents. Aha, that was the first really silly era. The Age of Legend is when Asaltan reaches the height of its empire, and humans reach like the apex of the power they would achieve before Starfall and before all of the major cataclysmic events that shaped the end of prehistory. During this age, Cyclopses who fled Golgahan became the founders of the Empire of Golarion in contemporary Casmaroon, specifically the region of Ibarra. If you're hearing lots of names and you want to know more details about them, I have links in the description of this video that will link you to the Pathfinder wiki. I absolutely recommend you use it. It is during the Age of Legend where the Algothul are just like, you guys fucked up, and they murk the leader of Golarion's Algothuls as part of the ceremony to cause Earthfall. And I know that I just talked about that one at light speed, but that's because I talked about a lot of events that would happen in the Age of Legends, in the Age of Serpents. But basically, at the very end of this age, the leader of Golarion's Algothuls gets murked, gets turned into a bunch of single-celled organisms, which is part of the ritual to summon the meteor, which would have annihilated all life on Golarion, except for the intervention and sacrifice of two deities named, let's see, these are some of the names: Akavena and Amazon. Akavena is an Asaltani moon goddess who decided to... Thank you, Shai. I probably will have you on at some point so that we can talk about my favorite thing to talk about, so we can talk about Tamando. It's just that I don't feel comfortable doing a video on Tamando all by myself. I don't know enough about it yet to do a video all by myself. But for sort of Golarian stuff, I absolutely feel comfortable just chatting for an hour. God, I'm surprised that it has already been 53 minutes. And Avecna decides to... that I mispronounced it again, but she was a moon goddess who sacrificed herself. And what she did was she moved the moon of Golarion in the direction of the meteor. And when the two shattered against each other, the shards of the meteorites became... the shards of the meteor hit her, killed her, and distraught her lover, Amazon, who was the deity of magic. He sacrificed himself in order to nullify the magic that made it so that the Starstone, the Grand Meteor Starstone, would not actually end all life. but the impact from the meteor shards caused enough dust to appear and rise up from the surface of the planet that it actually blotted out the sun. Do you remember when we were talking about Zon Kuthan earlier? Guess who's back, baby? Zon Kuthan emerged immediately after this happened, and he realized that this kind of technically fulfilled his agreement. So when he emerged, Abadar did not have the legal recourse to try and stop him right away, and the very first thing that he did, possibly, probably, was reach out to the horse lords who inhabited a region in Avestan that would become Nidal. And during this time, he was like, hey, you guys give me your souls and eternal servitude. I will spare your family and your friends from the very worst of Earthfall. They agreed, they formed the Umbral Court, and that was the very beginning of the Church of Zon Kuthan, the Kuthites, and Nidal, which is objectively the most interesting region. It's the most interesting region other than like the World Wound, but the World Wound was closed. I was really hoping we'd get to talk about the World Wound in this video, but I'm honestly not sure if we will. The Age of Darkness, it culminates. The Age of Dark culminates is not the right word. The Age of Darkness begins during this era, and it refers to the roughly 1,000 years wherein the dust that was orbiting the planets, the dust that was clogging the atmosphere of Golarion, was blocking out the light of the sun. And there is a lot of really interesting stuff that happens here, but this is effectively the beginning of recorded history. It begins roughly in the year negative 5,293, and it ends roughly in the year 4,000 negative 4,294. Some of the other stuff that happens during this age is the Divinity, which is a starship that crashed in Numeria from Andor Fafa, has an ill-fated encounter with the Dominion of the Black, which is a faction of eldritch beings that have formed a sort of conglomerate. It reminds me vaguely of the extragalactic people from Star Wars that have like bioships, and also just generic Lovecraft stuff. It's kind of like if you fused those two groups together, and also just made them like incredibly malevolent. If you amplified the malevolence of both of those groups and jacked it up. So really, really bad. Some of the other really cool stuff that happened during this specific era is the emergence of races such as the orcs and the dwarves, both of whom originally lived in the Darklands, which is what the world beneath the surface of the planet is referred to as. The orcs were very aggressive creatures that malevolently controlled a lot of the region, a lot of the area closest to the surface, and the dwarves had long believed in a prophecy known as the quest for the sky. This quest for the sky led them to the surface over the course of a multiple centuries long exodus from the central region of the Darklands, which is effectively just the Underdark, but make it Pathfinder. And I do mean that very seriously, because lots of Pathfinder stuff is just holdovers from when Paizo was doing D&D stuff, which was their like earliest history, I think. The quest for the sky, the quest for the sky refers to the prophetic belief that one day the dwarves would see the surface again, and they would just they really decided to do it. They took all of their people and they sort of started climbing out of the Darklands, and eventually they encountered the orcs. They started pushing the orcs back, and the orcs really had their asses handed to them multiple times over the course of this very complicated history. I definitely think the quest for the sky deserves its own full video. So much of this deserves its own full video that I'm so excited to just be sitting down and talking about this. And let me make sure that that's all of my notes for this. Yeah, cool. We're actually moving along. Next is the Age of Anguish, which is the shortest of the ages. With I definitely agree with you, Toll. The Underdark is the like least used thing in D&D, and I love the Underdark, so I hate that it's so critically underdeveloped. But the Age of Anguish, very dark, edgy name, is the name of the next age, and it is roughly 800 years long. This is an exceptionally chaotic era. It is probably the most chaotic of these ages. And the big stuff that happens here are gnomes migrate from the first world, which was the original world, the primordial plane, basically, and it was one of the first places to develop life in the multiverse that is the great beyond. All fey creatures originate there. And it's just a really weird place. It has creatures known as the eldest, which are demigods effectively, and they are very powerful primordial beings that lord over different aspects of nature. Gnomes come from there, and they migrated to Golarion. Let me see what else. The spawn of Rovagug, which are the evil sort of demi-children of Rovagug, began to come from the pit of Gormuz, which is a wound in the world that was caused when Sarenrae did an oopsie because some of her followers went over to, let me make sure that I see the region. Damn, I don't have the region. Okay. Some of Sarenrae's followers went over to Casmarin in the western reaches. They started to worship Rovagug unknowingly, and they did evil stuff thinking that they were worshiping Sarenrae because they had unknowingly been corrupted by Rovagug's wandering dreams. They became more and more evil and malevolent while thinking that they were self-righteous, and Sarenrae sent her herald over to investigate. Her herald gets murdered immediately, and Sarenrae decides that enough is enough. She nukes the planet and unknowingly creates a hole all the way, supposedly, to the dead vault. We're not super sure. And every once in a while, a titanic monster will come out of that hole and will just fuck shit up for a couple of years before it finally gets put down. The first one of those creatures is named Ulunats, and it attacked Nin Shabor before being defeated by the first pharaoh of Osiris, who created Sothis and used its body to create a building neighborhood known as the Black Dome. I absolutely love that some of this shit was said by Shai, and I mean that unsarcastically. I really like that what I'm talking about is known by people here, and this is just me nerding out for a little bit. But yeah, so some of the other spawn of Rovagug are still fucking around, kind of. The Tarask, which is the herald of Rovagug technically, and the greatest of its spawn, annihilated the kingdom that got attacked a couple of centuries before the beginning of the Age of Destiny, which is the next age, and was only defeated by a multinational coalition that lured it into a magical cave and put it to sleep. I really like so much Pathfinder lore, and it's so nice to just be able to word vomit it all out to an audience. I really appreciate that I have created a space where I can do something like this. The next age, I'm gonna try to see if I can get through these next little things. The Age of Anguish ends with the founding of Osiris, and it begins with the Age of Destiny. This is the longest documented age that has a set start date and end date. It begins in negative 3,470 and ends in negative 01. It is the age of It's effectively the age of Aradin, although Aradin doesn't actually appear onto some of the later stuff in this. But Aradin has technically been alive this whole time, if I remember correctly. He is the last Atsultani, and he is just a really cool dude who is one of the leaders of the humans that have emerged in the wake of the Age of Anguish and the beginning of the Age of Destiny. This age culminates when Aradin lifts the Starstone out of the Inner Sea and founds the city of Absalom, as well as the Starstone Cathedral, and becomes uplifted by the gods and becomes not just an immortal human, but also a full deity. Very cool. Very cool dude. Very good dude. Gets murdered later, kind of. We're not super sure. Aradin becomes the god of humanity when he very specifically lifts the Starstone out of the sea and uses his magic to create the city of Absalom. The gods saw this, thought he was dope, and decided to make him one of them. And then they were just like, we're also going to use this as an area to test and uplift potential godlings. Anyone who wants to become very cool and divine. During this era, we also see the Tarask emerge from the pit of Gormaz, annihilate certain regions like the city of Opara, and we also see the Titanic conflict between Geb and Nex, who are two very powerful archmages. Geb is the immortal, malevolent necromancer who founds the nation of Geb, and Nex was a very powerful, usually less dickish archmage who thought it'd be pretty good to stop this evil necromancer. This age ends in the year -01 and also begins with other things. The Age of Enthronement, which is the next longest age. Actually, this is the longest age. The Age of Destiny is the second longest. The Age of Enthronement goes from the year 001 all the way to the year 4606. So it is a longer, by like a little over a millennia, era than the Age of Destiny. And this age begins with the founding of the city of Absalom and ends with the death of Aradin. The supposed death of Aradin. I don't actually know if Aradin's dead. I don't know if we've seen anything that like just very explicitly is like, this motherfucker is dead. I personally have theories that I think are more fun that I would probably use in my campaigns that are not Aradin is dead. Some of the big stuff that happens during this era is the emergence of the very first people to pass the Starstone test, other than Aradin, who technically passed it, but I always consider him to be a god just because he's very cool. And the Starstone thing was the event that allowed him to undergo his own apotheosis. The central events, the passers of the test are Caden Callian, a god of beer, bravery, wine, and freedom. Iomade, all of these people are human, interestingly, but Iomade, a goddess of justice, valor, mercy, leadership, and just paladins and knighthood. And Nor Gore Burger, the god of thieves, murder, poison, and greed. Yeah, I had to remember. What the last one was. All of these are different people who have passed the test at different points. In order, I believe it's Caden, and then it is Nor, and then it is Iomade. I know Iomade is last. I could be wrong about the order of Caden and Norberger. I also really like the theories that Shai is positing. I personally think that he is trapped in effectively the same way as Rovagug. That is my personal theory. I have talked about this before, but I have an idea for an adventure path that revolves around the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I could see someone fitting in the Aradin thing in there. I'm going to talk about that in a video where I talk about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which is something that's probably going to be my next one. Also, during this time is the birth of nations like Taldor, the devil-touched emperor, the devil-touched empire of Cheliax, although the devil-touching of Cheliax has not happened yet, and multiple other nations that first rose to prominence during this period. And very noticeably, very importantly, this is also the age where Tar-Baphon first emerges, and he lives his mortal life. Tar-Baphon is the Whispering Tyrant. In his mortal life, he was a necromancer who learned secrets of necromancy and went to the Isle of Terror and learned how to become a lich, which in the setting of Pathfinder is significantly different from how it is in most D&D settings. Among other things, typically the secrets of lichdom are granted by an external party, which allows you to undergo a ritual which involves the sacrifice of something very important to you or other very difficult tasks that culminate with you becoming a lich. But Tarbafan ruled over Ustalav, which is generic creepy land in the region of Avestan. It is effectively just if a horror movie if every horror movie in the world was one country, it is a real bad place to live. He ruled over it, and he was a real nightmare. He was a necromancer who consorted with all sorts of evil creatures, including devils, very prominently devils. And Aradin decided at some point that enough was enough, murked him, and unfortunately for literally everyone, getting murked by a deity was the central component that needed to happen to Tarbafan before he could become a lich. Now, for reasons that I'm not sure are ever explained in A Tyrant's Grasp, it actually took several hundred years, multiple millennia, for Tarbafan to rise again. But Tarbafan rose again in the third millennium of the Age of Enthronement, which is the current age that we're talking about right now. And he was a full lich, and he was far more powerful than he was in life. And he took over Ustalav and the Orcish hold of Belzikin, which was the central region that orcs moved to in the wake of the countless defeats that they suffered at the hands of the dwarves. And they took over a dwarvish sky citadel, which was one of the ancient cities that the very first dwarves built before they moved to the Darklands, and made it his own place. And he had just a full civilization of orcs for multiple millennia. He was not immortal or anything. He died and he had successors, but he was an orcish warlord of great renown. And his land and Ustalav were conquered by the reborn Tarbafan, who then just sort of went around his region of Avestan being a giant dickhead, killing, murking, and corrupting people whenever he could, and also ruling from the capital of Ustalav, which is a ruined city. And ultimately, humans would set aside their differences one more time, create something called the Shining Crusade, of which there have been multiple since then. And together, all of them, including Iomade and Eredin's Herald, worked together and ultimately, after a significant campaign, forced Tarbafan back to his citadel in the region known as Gallowspire. In Gallowspire is where Tarbafan was sort of stuck, sort of trapped, up until the beginning of the events of Tyrant's Grasp, which is the final adventure path in Pathfinder 1 edition, and the first edition of Pathfinder. It is an exceptional, yes, yes, Shai, Arazani, the God, this lady's life sucks. I have notes about her. But basically, what happens to her is she gets extremely murked during not the final battle, but during one of the lead ups to the finale of the initial Shining Crusade. Her body is interred her body's interred in one of the major human cities, and necromantic thieves come and take her. I think it's very specifically Geb who comes and takes her, and he drags her back to the nation of Geb, a nation that he established during his war with Nex, and turns her into a lich and effectively a sort of demi-goddess of death. She was actually such a powerful being in life and then in her afterlife that before she became the Lich Queen of Geb, the nation, not the dude, she became a demigoddess and maybe a full god, but I'm pretty sure she was only a demigoddess, which is different from being a herald. It is a greater level of status than being a divine herald, although it is not radically more powerful, but it is like in a different league. And she gets corrupted. All of her insecurities and all of her frustrations at Aradin for abandoning her, because this was before Aradin even died. This was back when Aradin was fully active in the world and was like listening and responding to prayers and indirectly guiding nations, even though he had already been gone from Golarion for at least a few millennia. Um, she was effectively abandoned by him, and Geb used those feelings to corrupt her and to make her hate all of this sort of stuff. And she is a central player in the Tyrant's Grasp adventure path. I'm not sure of like how much of stuff to spoil, so I decided not to go too deep into details. But you will see her in the adventure path, assuming you play out the whole thing and you do it more or less as the books say. If you want to do it without following the books, I think that would be tricky because that is such a pivotal adventure path and it's so structured that I think it'd be difficult to do some of the stuff without it. During the end of this age, there was this thing that was known as the Starfall Doctrine, which was a series of prophecies written in the tongue of Ataltani that predicted that Aradin would return in the year 4606 to guide humanity for 1,000 years. It was predicted that he would return in what is modern Cheliax. And when he didn't, this transformed the Age of Glory into the Age of Lost Omens. The Age of Glory is one of the 10 ages that is on the Absalom Reckoning calendar. It is not actually an age. It's one of those 2 ages that is here but didn't actually happen. And it was supposed to be the millennium of glorious human existence and glorious human rule that would have happened if Aradin had returned and had become the god king of Cheliax and the other human kingdoms. In fact, the king of Cheliax at the time was ready to step down and name Aradin God King, effectively. And when it didn't happen, everyone was bummed, and a lot of really bad shit happened. In the year 4606, the Age of Lost Omens begins when all of Aradin's followers suddenly stop getting words from their gods. From their god. I can't remember like the ultra specific details of how this happened, but effectively one day they could hear and commune with their god on some level, and the next day they couldn't. It probably wasn't that instantaneous, but I do think it's funny to imagine that it was that instantaneous. This culminates in this begins the Age of Lost Omens, which is the age all of the adventure paths take place in. You can see snippets of the past, and I think that in one adventure path there is time travel that happens, but effectively, if you are playing a mundane campaign of Pathfinder, even if you're not doing an adventure path, you are effectively going to be playing during this age, unless you want to do something unusual. There are campaigns such as the Second Darkness campaign, which is a campaign that revolves around the idea of what if someone starts to try to do a second Earthfall that lets you see the ancient past, and there's like stuff that you can see, but it's only like one region. So there is like little workarounds around this. But in the Age of Lost Omens, lots of different stuff happens. I believe the same year that Aradin was supposed to descend, but maybe the next year, the World Wound happens, which is a hole in reality through which Golarion is connected permanently, temporarily, to the abyss, and demons can just sort of crawl through and into the world, which is actually really, really bad because in Golarion, those sorts of portals to the abyss are usually temporary, and also they're not gigantic most of the time. So the World Wound, which is in it's in central North Avestan, is a very big deal. It is the central location and the central theme around which the adventure path Wrath of the Righteous, which is also a video game, takes place. It is extremely cool. It is my favorite singular location in all of first edition Pathfinder. I would love to do stuff in it. Shai is correct. In Pathfinder second edition, the World Wound has closed. It actually closes in the wake of the canon ending of the Wrath of the Righteous. One of the interesting things about Pathfinder second edition is that you can see the effects of all of the adventure paths in subtle and not so subtle ways, because Pathfinder second edition canonically takes place after the different adventure paths and stuff have all culminated. So you can see stuff like the new Pirate King of the region of the Shackles, which is just pirates. It's just pirate land over in Garund. Very cool region. That is also location of an adventure path. You can see lots of different stuff like the new Pirate King. You can also incorporate your own canon if you have players who did these adventure paths and had events and were players in these events. So you could actually see players as NPCs in different campaigns, which I really like. And is something that I would do if I had played Pathfinder 1e extensively. I am extraordinarily familiar with the lore. I am not actually someone who got to play that many Pathfinder campaigns because it is not extraordinarily easy for me with my disabilities and my health stuff to find campaigns to be in, although I'd love to be in 1e and 2e campaigns. But yeah, the Age of Lost Omens is the current era in history. It is a very fascinating era. If someone wants to, they could go explore places like Earth. They getting to Earth would be extraordinarily difficult from Golarion unless you are in a high level campaign or your campaign is sci-fi focused, which is certainly possible in Pathfinder. There's stats for things like starships and all sorts of other things in both Pathfinder and in Starfinder. So it is entirely possible for someone to find a logical way for someone to get from Golarion to Earth or vice versa. There's also very important links to Earth. There is a Reign of Winter campaign, which is an adventure path wherein you canonically go to Earth. There is the Strange Aeons adventure path where you could end up stranded on Earth if some stuff happens because there is a location in the final adventure that is linked to Earth. There's actually just a number of different ways you could get there that would be fairly easy. There's also creatures from Earth that are active in the world and in the cosmology of the Great Beyond, like Baba Yaga, who was born on Earth and lived on Earth during her mortal life before becoming an immortal witch, although that was in the basically primeval past. And lots of different stuff you could do to get to Earth. It's also possible to figure out the exact year that it is on Earth because in the adventure path Reign of Winter, you fight Rasputin. That's a spoiler. I'll mention that spoiler because the Reign of Winter is one of the older campaign paths, and also because that is the easiest way to get to Earth that I can think of that GM would not have to try to think about the logistics of unless they just wanted to go with here's a portal spell that leads you to Earth, which is super valid. I'm not here to tell you how to play your game. I don't want you to make it harder for yourself. I just want you to have fun. If you guys want to adventure on Earth, super easy. There's also other links. The deities of Osirian, like Ra and the other deities, are actually Earth deities as well. This is explicitly mentioned in different campaign materials. I can't remember exactly which ones, but it is very canonical that Ra is a deity that is worshipped both on Earth and in Golarion. So it's canon. There's creatures from Earth that are they aren't. I know for a while it was said that they were. I'm gonna go onto the wiki and see if I can find this because I definitely remember. Let me see if I can find that. I'm gonna see if I can find the article that links it. Let's see. Ba, 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 ba. I know for a while that was like said to be the case. I'm actually on the wiki right now, so I'm not reading the stuff right this second, unfortunately. So if you're commenting, sorry. Also, I'm on the Earth page for the wiki. I'll link it in this. Let's see. Ba, 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 ba. Okay. Oh, Shy is correct. Okay, good. I'm glad that I came back and I read that. I did vanish for 2 seconds. So Shy is correct. They started there and they went to Earth and then they came back. Yeah, it's very convoluted. I actually really like that kind of thing, especially because I love the idea of doing a Pathfinder campaign that takes place mostly on Earth and I've thought of a number of different ways to do it. So it's very interesting to see that other people are as like nerdy as I am about this kind of thing. But yeah, Earth very canonically exists in Pathfinder and has actually influenced Golarian's history in a number of subtle ways that are very interesting. Also, the year to year date on Golarian, it is in 4713 AR. It was 1918 AD on Earth. So if you wanted to do a modern Earth campaign that involved Golarian, you would have to go a century into the future, which is very funny to me. Another thing that I think is very fascinating and is worth mentioning is that at some point in the future, something will occur on Golarian that causes it to vanish and become what is known as a lost planet. We know that this is canon if you take Starfinder as a direct continuation of Pathfinder, which it is in Starfinder. You don't have to do that in Pathfinder, but you can make it so that at some points Golarion vanishes and Golarion is replaced by Absalom Station, which is the setting where a whole bunch of different characters in Starfinder are from and is also probably the base world for a lot of different Starfinder campaigns. Absalom Station takes the place of Golarion when Golarion vanishes, and there is a period of time known as the Gap wherein it is really difficult for people to remember what was going on. And this period is believed to be when Golarion goes missing. It is known that stuff and people from Golarion existed. It is not some sort of freaky, it is not some sort of like Planet X thing where this planet probably doesn't exist in any meaningful form and it is the subject of conspiracy theories. Golarion canonically existed in Starfinder and just doesn't anymore. It's just gone and is replaced with Absalom Station. I think that's such a funny idea. They're just like, what if we just deleted a planet? We accidentally a world. Um, I really like that idea. I think it's a very silly, goofy time. And yeah, we have been talking for over an hour, almost an hour and a half now. I hit all of the major stuff in my notes. I probably will have a more extended live stream on the different ages and the different worlds. But it has been so much fun just chatting with everyone and having a goofy old time. I'm so excited that we were able to sit down together and that this live stream has gone as well as it has. I hope that all of you have a great night, and I am going to go ahead and end the live stream right now. But bye, everyone. I hope that you all have a wonderful night.